Okay. So as you can see here, we have our
I'm
mission
sorry about that. It is recording.
Okay. Got our mission statement and then some of the projects we work on. Today, I'm primarily talking about our Prairie seed project. And it's a pretty recent project, just in the last few years. Okay. So about me, I grew up in Harrison County in Western Iowa, went to the University of Minnesota, got a Bachelor of Urban Studies, and then a Master of Public Administration. So nothing related to biology or botany or any kind of science, but been at Golden Hills for 8 years almost. So in that time, I've learned a lot about prairies and native plants and always continuing to learn. I wanted to give a little bit of background. I'm guessing most people on here are already familiar with prairies, but just in case anyone isn't, I'll kind of run through these slides pretty quick. So prairie is basically a grassland. There's 3 different images here that show the transition between grassland and forest. Prairies are on the left and then on the top. And then very few trees basically, and occasionally some shrubs or other woody vegetation, but for the most part, pretty open grassland. And then prairies have up to a few hundred species of plants, again, dominated by grasses and sedges, and a lot of the forbs are legumes, and then a few random shrubs here and there. But in addition to the plant species, there's hundreds more species of animals, fungi, etc. This is, I think it's an interesting visualization of the tallgrass prairie. So that darker green on the left is the tallgrass, and then west of there is the mixed prairies, and west of that is shortgrass. And then the right map is the corn belt. So it aligns pretty closely with what was the tallgrass prairie. And it's interesting because corn is a grass, so it kind of makes sense that tallgrass prairies made the best land for corn. This is the image on the left. The yellow is what was prairie, and then on the right, the gray is what is cropland. So most of the prairie has been converted to cropland. There are some places where there are more trees now because there is not fire and grazing, which I'm going to talk about next, but some places in southern Iowa, you can see there are still remnant prairies, but a lot of those are heavily grazed and often degraded remnants. Really hard to see. A lot of them are so small that you'd have to really zoom in to see the little, remnant prairies that are an acre or a few acres in size. So as I mentioned, fires and grazing are really what kept the prairie. So without those 2 things, you get woody encroachment. I think especially in the Loess Hills, the fire behavior is a little bit different than it is in some other parts, like flatter areas, more rolling terrain. The steepness of the hills really drives fires up the hill. And then also the land, the shape of the land. So in Western Iowa, the rivers and streams tend to flow more northeast to southwest, versus in the rest of Iowa, the rivers flow more southeasterly. So here, the fires would have followed ridge lines and river valleys versus having to cross them all with the prevailing southwest winds in the warmer, drier times of the year. So prairie fires were pretty common in Western Iowa. And then there had always also been grazing animals like bison. That photo on the bottom is broken kettle grasslands up north of Sioux City. That's the largest remnant prairie in Iowa. They have a bison herd. So a few examples of how prairies can be categorized in addition to the tallgrass and mixed and short. We have remnants, which I've mentioned already. So remnant is a prairie that's never been plowed before. 99.9% of Iowa's prairies have been plowed. Of that 0.1%, that remains, most of those are in the Loess Hills. So we're really kind of fortunate. If you're a prairie nerd in the Loess Hills, there's, compared to the rest of the state, quite a few of them. And then they can also be categorized by the soil moisture, so wet, mesic, dry. And then the ecotype, the landform map here shows the different ecotypes. So I'm primarily talking about Loess Hills, but we do also include a little bit of the Missouri floodplain and then the southern Iowa drift plain. A little bit of background about the Loess Hills. They've been categorized by geologists as a landform, and the Loess Hills it is an area where there's at least 60 feet of loess soil. Loess soil itself is not uncommon. It's found throughout the world, but the quantity and the depth is what really sets the Loess Hills apart. So the Iowa Loess Hills, and then they go a little bit into northwest Missouri, are one place in the world, and the other one is the Loess Plateau in China along the Yellow River. So they're pretty unique. In 1986, part of the Loess Hills in Monona County were designated as a national natural landmark. The scenic byway was designated by the state in 1998 and then became a national scenic byway in the year 2000. And that covers more than 200 miles of a spine route, the main route, which is all paved, and then there's some optional excursion loops, and some of those are gravel roads too. But Golden Hills coordinates that byway, so if you head to the visitloesshills.org website, you can find maps and itineraries and all the tourist information. Special landscape areas. So the map here shows in brown and that darker green, the area that's the Loess Hills. And then the dark green spots are the special landscape areas, or SLAs. So there's 12 of them, and they are kind of like the quintessential Loess Hills. So in most cases, they're the steepest part, the westernmost bluffs. And if you see pictures of the Loess Hills, it's probably in one of the special landscape areas. So these areas, because they're so rugged, most of these hills have not been farmed ever. So they contain 80% of the remnant prairies in the Loess Hills. And as you can see, in most cases, it's a pretty narrow band, like less than a mile wide. A little bit wider up in Monona and Harrison, and then up in Plymouth County. But for the most part, the SLAs are very narrow, but they contain a lot of the remnant prairies. And then about 30% of those SLAs are protected either as public lands or private easements. So a total of 5% of the Loess Hills are permanently protected. So I got this map from Laura at the Tallgrass Prairie Center at last month's seed stakeholder meeting, but I thought it was a cool map. So there's a link down at the bottom if anyone's interested, but it's provisional seed zones. This map's based mostly on temperatures and aridity. And I thought it was interesting that you can really see how the Loess Hills area is different than the rest of Iowa. It's on average warmer and drier. So this map was designed to help people with planning seed for native seed production and like where to purchase seed and ecotype and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit different than the ecotype regions that we have laid out in Iowa, but it's just an interesting, another alternative, I guess, and cool visualization of how the Loess Hills are a little bit different than the rest of Iowa. And this was a paper I found. There's a link there. And I can share this PowerPoint with anyone who's interested and wants to see the links, but the 3 different photos have some summaries. So basically there's quite a few species that grow in the Loess Hills, but don't grow elsewhere in Iowa. And then some species where it's the Loess Hills include their northernmost or their southernmost range. So the one on the left is mostly species, and the ones that have an asterisk are restricted to the Loess Bluff prairies, it says. So those are all species that you probably won't find, or they're pretty rare in the rest of Iowa, but are somewhat common in the Loess Hills. And most of those are also typically found farther west in the mixed grass prairies. And for most of them, I think probably the Nebraska sandhills would be the closest place you'd find them. I'm going to talk about just a few examples of those species. So yucca, so the maps I'm going to show, if you're not familiar, the lighter green areas are the counties where it is native. And then the darker green means it's native to that state. So yucca is one that, as you can see, is more of it's a pretty dry species, more in the Great Plains, the High Plains out west. But all the Loess Hills counties do have it too. Loco weed, another one. It does go a little bit up into northwest Iowa and a few other counties, but for the most part, it's primarily Loess Hills in Iowa. That one is an early bloomer. That'll be hopefully in May, blooming. Skeleton weed, again, a few other counties in northwest Iowa, but primarily Loess Hills, and then places farther west and even out into the southwest. Dotted blazing star, a few more counties in Iowa besides the Loess Hills, but this is an interesting one. It's a lot of the Loess Hills prairies you don't see the prairie blazing star, but you'll see punctata more often. And then if you go east, it's the opposite. And cutleaf iron plant. So this is again, almost exclusively in the Loess Hills in Iowa, but then you can see all the way to Arizona and Southern California. So Golden Hills Native Seed Project started in the fall of 2018. We did an event with Hitchcock Nature Center where we got volunteers to come help pick seed for them. Since then, we've expanded quite a bit, primarily finding grants to cover our time and any other expenses. And then last year, we did 19 events and had almost 100 people attend. And then we also have a list of people who either are interested or have volunteered, and that's also almost 100 people. So everything we've done so far has been by hand. A lot of these remnants are pretty remote and rugged, and you have to hike there. There's not really a good way to get to them otherwise. And we have so far, all the events have been free and they've been open to all ages. So we try to let people know in advance if you're maybe not in physical shape to go climb a hill, it's probably not the right choice for you, but we do make it free and open to families and anyone who wants to join. The most of the seed that we collect is given back to the landowner. DNR has pretty strict rules about where their seed can be used. So for those sites, if we do a state park or wildlife area, we tend to just give all of that seed to the DNR for them to use. County conservation boards are usually more flexible. So like at Hitchcock, for example, in Pottawatomie County, a lot of the seed we pick there does go to them for their restoration projects, but they do let us keep some too. So we've made these seed mixes, these little packets before, and then we also do a little bit of plant propagation. I'll go through a little bit of just kind of what it takes to do the planning for the events. So finalize the details of logistics, where it's going to be, what time, etc. Most of the places we already have relationships with the land managers, so we basically just talk with them and they're usually fine with it. Sometimes an organization or agency will want us to, sign an agreement or fill out a permit or something. But with a lot of the county conservation boards are pretty open, and we don't really do anything formal. Then we'll create a flyer and do social media posts. I'll send an email to the volunteer list. Sometimes we do press releases, not always. It just kind of depends on how many we have going on. Usually, most of the seed harvests we've done have been in the fall. We're hoping to expand that more to the summer, but we tend to be really heavy in September, October. I think social media is probably the best way we reach people, but in the past there have been times when we've done a press release and there have been people that show up because they saw it in the paper. So it's good to get some diverse channels with that. And usually tell people what to wear if they, if they've never done it before, wear hiking boots. Suggest long pants usually because of ticks, and just suggest people bring bug spray, sunscreen, etc. I usually don't require an RSVP, mostly just because it's just another thing to manage. And when we're doing, 2 or 3 in a week, it can just be a lot. So the main issue with that is, there's always a risk, like nobody's going to show up, but so far that's only happened one time. So usually we at least get a few people, and we've had as many as 30 attend. If you wanted to do a seed harvest, and if you were just doing one, I would say probably would be smart to RSVP, but since we do so many, I'm gonna do it anyway. If nobody shows up, that's fine with me, but we definitely like to have the volunteers too. So when people show up, we have them sign in and sign a waiver. I explain what we're gonna do, any of the risks they might experience. And then we talk about which species we're targeting at that time. A lot of times most of the time we just do mixes. So we mix everything together, and I just point out which species are ready, and then we put them all in bags and buckets and combine it all. But occasionally there's certain species where we'll want to keep them separate. For example, echinacea is one that because if you put the echinacea seed heads in with everything else, it'll kind of pick up all the other seeds, and then it can be harder to clean that later. So certain species we keep separate, but most of the time we mix it all. And then we provide bags, buckets, and then clippers for some of the species, and encourage people to wear gloves if they want to. And then afterwards, usually do a social media post thanking people and post some photos. Usually send an email to everyone who attended also. And then sorting and storing the seed. Like I said, a lot of it ends up going back to the land managers, so we don't necessarily do long-term storage, but just getting it back to the right place where it needs to go. And a new aspect we're adding this year is some native seed production. So last year, the Loess Hills State Forest has some raised beds at their visitor center. We provided them with some plants, and so they've established these little seed plots there with some of those species. This photo has side oats, and then I think there was some echinacea and some Indian plantain in that one. We received a specialty crop block grant last year to work with private landowners to develop seed plots. And again, we're starting on a small scale, gonna try to work out any kinks before we really expand it, but we intend to grow it over the next couple of years and just have more people producing local ecotype native seed on a regional level. So the plants like this, this photo is also from the State Forest Visitor Center. And some of the plants in this one were from seed that we had harvested in the Loess Hills and then propagated in a greenhouse. We're also planning to work with some of the local growers in Western Iowa, like John Judson at Diversity Farms, and then Bumans with Backyard Design. So we'll purchase some plants from them and then help people learn how to grow them. In addition to the actual harvesting and then with the production, we've done some educational programs about storing and cleaning seed. Last fall, we had a seed processing day where we had volunteers help clean some of the seed. And then this winter, we did 2 virtual sessions called Mini Seed School, and that was about preserving and storing seed. And the Mini Seed School has been recorded, so that's available to watch on our website. So for the species, for the seed harvest in the past, we've primarily really gotten whatever we can. But for the seed production, we're kind of going to be more targeted. So species that the county conservation boards of DNR have said that they really want more of, and also any of the species that are harder to find or to harvest. Obviously, we have to be careful. If there's any like endangered or rare species, we don't want to over harvest. And so we educate volunteers about that before we do any harvesting. But in some places there might be a very small population of a species, and then there might be a different place where there's a whole bunch of it. So we would encourage people to go to where there is more of a species so that we don't over harvest. Also going to target some of those Loess Hills species that I mentioned that aren't really found outside of the Loess Hills in Iowa. Some of the summer and spring species. So like I said, most of the harvesting we've done has been in the fall. So we've tended to miss a lot of those early blooming plants. So this year, hoping to get out earlier in the spring and summer and get some of the species that are either blooming now or will be soon. We have primarily targeted the prairie species, but we do want to get some of the savanna and woodland species as well. And then sedges are a group that I haven't gotten much of in the past, and I'd like to target that more just because I haven't really done much with it. And they were an important part of prairies. So I mentioned Backyard Designs. That's Bill and Chelsea Buman. They're in Shelby County near Harlan. We're going to do a field day and probably multiple field days to learn about their production and how they clean it, etc. Last spring, I visited the Tallgrass Prairie Center. And then this past winter, I visited the DNR's Prairie Resource Center and learned from them and took some photos and videos and did a blog post about each of those visits, just trying to learn kind of what they do and how their seed harvesting and seed production works. We'll probably have more. So if you're interested in any of that, you can contact me. So I'll see if I can open this. So I worked with several partners, including the DNR and some county conservation board staff, to develop this giant spreadsheet of plants in the Loess Hills. So it includes some of the non-natives too, but I think we probably got almost all of the natives, hopefully, based on different inventories that we had and several other spreadsheets that I've compiled and tried to put into one space. So there we go. So I'll just go through real quick. The color coding is, so green are ones that we really want to target. Red are ones that we don't necessarily want, either because they're invasive or aggressive for the most part. And then the white are kind of not good or bad, but just plants that it'd be fine to get some of them, but they're not necessarily targeted. So
Plants we're not seeing your spreadsheet?
Oh, let's see. Who's here? That work?
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So you have the botanical name and common name. These two columns here are inventories from HNC is Hitchcock Nature Center, and then this one is Wheeler Grove. So those are 2 county parks in Pottawatomie County. So that was kind of a starting point for this spreadsheet, is finding the species that are already here that we know. And then We have information about germination codes for propagation, so the stratification that the seed needs. Seeds per ounce, soil moisture, which is wet, mesic, dry, wetland code, sun exposure, which is prairie, savanna, or woodland, the height of the plant, the bloom color, the bloom time, and then these are the kind of the most important ones for us is when the seed is ripe, so the months that that seed is ready. And then we have Loess Hills coefficient of conservatism, which is a score of how common or rare a species is in the Loess Hills. And then I won't go through all of this, but there's a lot more information about the plant families, other like habitat information, and then information about certain pollinator species. So yeah, these first few columns is kind of the meat of it that we've really focused on, but still obviously a work in progress, a lot of blanks. All the yellow stuff is stuff I don't know, but still working on it. But I think it's been a good exercise for me to help me learn some of the plants and learn more about them, where they grow, that kind of stuff. So this is free to view on our website. And if you have information on any of the blanks, I'd be happy to fill those in. Okay, you see the PowerPoint now? So,
yes, we see it. Thank you.
Okay, so based on that spreadsheet, I did a little bit of calculating, just some information I thought was interesting. So the asters are very abundant, and then grasses, sedges, and legumes, and then sedges, asters, spurges, milkweeds are some of the common families and genera. So I just thought that was interesting to see that. We've worked with Dr. Tom Rosberg of Drake University on several plant ID classes. We started them last winter. They were all virtual. Those are also recorded and on our website. Then we did 8 more this winter, and they've been really popular. We covered a lot of different plant families, and then also different like plant conservation and botany topics. So this year we had one about plant evolution, diversity, designing native seed mixes, and then weeds and invasive species, among the other native plant family classes. Came up with a list of some examples of uses of native plants. So it does not include like edible or medicinal properties, but things like using native plants for shelter, for rope, for dyeing, for biofuels. There's a lot of interesting information about using switchgrass and other native grasses and plants as an alternative to corn ethanol. So that website has a link to a spreadsheet of some of that information, and the sources of the information are linked there too. So I mentioned propagating plants. Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs has a greenhouse. They used to have a horticulture program, but that program ended and they weren't really using much of the greenhouse. So they let us use it for free. So that's been a great partnership. We don't use the whole thing. Part of it is used by Culinary Arts. They grow some vegetables in there for their program, but we basically have half of the greenhouse to use. And then we don't grow a huge quantity, basically maybe 1,000 plants or so, but we do a plant sale, and then a lot of them this year, a lot of the plants are going to be used for the native seed production plots. We also have done some virtual and in-person classes about growing native plants in the greenhouse. So some of the lessons learned in future plans. So record keeping, I I can't emphasize enough how important it is to document everything. So this is especially useful when you're doing harvesting. Make sure you write down what you're picking on which day and which location. Usually I label the bags, every single bag. And then when I'm in the greenhouse, I label every tray that I'm planting, and I also keep a separate spreadsheet. Try to have it in multiple locations in case anything happens to that information. I learned the hard way that I think I'll remember something and then I don't. So it's best just to write it down, and I don't think you can keep too much information written down. I've thought about doing some mapping. We haven't really done that yet, but again, for some of those species that maybe aren't super abundant, but if there's like a good population in a specific area of a park or on a specific trail, to kind of identify where those are so that it'd be easier instead of just wandering around for a long time through a prairie looking for a species. If there was areas with a larger population, that would be good to target. I mentioned we mostly do mixes, but I think we'll probably start to do more of the single species harvesting too. And if we get a group of volunteers, it'd be pretty easy, I would think, to have, 2 or 3 of them go and say, you're just looking for the echinacea, and then someone else is just looking for another species. So that'd be easier than trying to separate them afterwards, for sure. And then organizing and storing systems. We haven't figured out the best way to do that. Like I said, it's mostly just, we use paper bags for the most part, and I just try to label everything and keep it separate. So I would love to hear anyone's suggestions for that. And then along with that, seed bank and longer term storage. Most of the seed that we've been picking has been used, but I think it'd be great to develop kind of a longer term storage and a seed bank so that we have a diverse local ecotype seed bank. I'm working on developing this. So this screenshot here is an example of a handout, or I guess a virtual handout that I'm working on that includes information about the different species that we're going to target. The Field Museum in Chicago has some really great resources, so that's what the screenshot is from, but I'm working on using some of their information and then kind of specializing it for the Loess Hills. So targeting, they have some species in Illinois that we don't have in the Loess Hills, and vice versa. So coming up with a document that people could look at. So volunteers want to go out at a certain time, then they could know what seed is ready and how to identify it. And then I put a question mark with seed cleaning equipment. We haven't done any of that on a large scale. Like I mentioned, we've done some seed cleaning by hand on a pretty small scale, but if we were to scale up, that'd definitely be something to invest in. So a few species that are going to be targeting and hopefully will be ready in the next month or so. We do have past flower blooming. Dutchman's breeches and bloodroot are up also. And then a few other species that should be coming up pretty soon. And then hopefully we'll get out in May or June to get some of that seed. And like I said, probably doing at least once a month starting in May so that we can get some of those earlier blooming species versus only the fall ones. I wanted to mention a few other things in addition to our prairie seed harvest. Iowa Prairie Network hosts prairie walks around the state. The Loess Hills Prairie Seminar is in June near Ottawa. That's a free, family-friendly event. The North American Prairie Conference was just announced will be in Lincoln in July. And then I have not heard yet about the Iowa Prairie Conference, but that's usually held every other year. So just if you're interested in prairie events, check out those. And this is the links. I shared all of these links before already, but they're all on one page here. And then the Visit Loess Hills hiking guide. So that map on the right shows the guide that we have on the Visit Loess Hills website of all the places you can go hike. And almost all of them have prairies, and most of them have remnant prairies. So if you check out that map, you can find out where to go hiking. And then it also has information about other amenities like camping and if there's other types of trails. So what time is it? Okay, I'll just run through real quick. We got a bunch of slides about places where you can go see prairie. So a lot of the ones that are on this map, I'm gonna just run through real quick and got some photos. So I'll go north to south. Plymouth County, Broken Kettle Grasslands, that's the largest remnant and the largest roadless area in Iowa. And then not far from there is Five Ridge Prairie, Heda Hills, Mount Talbot. Woodbury County, Sioux City Prairie, and Stone State Park. Sioux City Prairie is interesting because it's in the middle of town, but it's a remnant, so it's surrounded by the city. Loess Hills Wildlife Area, and this is where the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar that I mentioned is held every year. Turin Wildlife Management Area is also in Monona County. Loess Hills State Forest and Preparation Canyon. So State Forest is 4 units over 2 counties. So Preparation Canyon unit of the Loess Hills State Forest is adjacent to Preparation Canyon State Park, which is confusing, but there's a state park and a state forest. And then I'll come back to that one. Little Sioux unit and Mondamon unit and Pisgah are the other 3 units. So there's 4 units in the state forest in 2 counties. And then that's all DNR public land. And then Murray Hill is a county park, which is adjacent to the Little Sioux unit of Loess Hills State Forest. It's also the starting point of, or the northern point of Brent's Trail, which is about a 14-mile trail. It's recently named the best hike in Iowa by Backpacker magazine. It's one of the most rugged and challenging trails in all of the Midwest. This is a county park also along Brent's Trail and next to the Little Sioux unit of Loess Hills State Forest. Pisgah unit is pictured on the right. That picture can see a bunch of dead cedars. That's a really high quality remnant prairie that they've been doing some great restoration work on. And then the lower photo is Willow Lake, which is a county conservation area. Again, Mondamon unit of Loess Hills State Forest, that's the southernmost of the 4 units. Old Town is a conservation area south of Missouri Valley, and that's County Conservation Board. Hitchcock Nature Center is probably one of the most popular places in the Loess Hills. Close to Council Bluffs, they have a nature center lodge building. They also have cabins, campground, but about 10 miles of hiking too. So it's because of, I think, the proximity to the metro, it is one of the most visited places. Vincent Bluff State Preserve. This, like the Sioux City Prairie, this one's in the middle of Council Bluffs. The photo on the right, you can see the downtown Omaha skyline. It's another unique one because it's surrounded by the city, and you can just see the interstate and railroads and the airport and all the suburban development, but you're in a little remnant in the middle of it. And then down to Mills County, so Folsom Point Preserve, that's owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy, but open to the public for hiking. And then West Oak Forest is a county conservation property. Possum Hollow is a wildlife management area in Fremont County. And then Slusher Wildlife Area is next to Waubonsee State Park. And those are both great places for hiking through Loess Hills remnants. Then I want to mention a couple of ones that are outside of the Loess Hills technically, but still worth a visit. So Dynaston Prairies in Shelby County, a little bit east of the Loess Hills. It's an upland prairie, and I think might be the only one the only remnant in the Nishnabotna watershed, besides Ware and Prairie, which is this one and that one. So this one's in Mills County. It's private property, but it's on the floodplain. And as far as I'm aware, it's the only floodplain remnant in the Nishnabotna watershed. So Guynison is a state preserve, open to the public. And then Ware and Prairie is private. I have been there. They do allow visitors with permission, but it's not open to the public. So, does anyone have questions?
Thank you, Lance. That was great. I think it's interesting that you try and involve families and people of all ages in your activities. Has that been a goal of your program?
Yeah, we want to keep it open to people who are interested. And we have had quite a few families and kids. We've had, last year, one of the events, we had several members of a Girl Scout troop. Mm-hmm. And I mean, most of it is pretty simple stuff. You know, it's not like a huge learning curve or anything, as long as we help them identify the right species. So, and I think most of the time they really enjoy it too.
That's great. What a good experience for them. Anybody, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Are the land managers appreciative of getting some of their seed?
Yeah. Yep. And it was really kind of their idea in the first place. So like Hitchcock in Pottawatomie County, they do go out on their own and harvest seed, but they just don't have staff capacity to get the amount that they would like.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Ruth said, wonderful presentation and fabulous photos, really incredible. And I think I can speak for us all that those were some amazing and unique prairies that I wish we could all visit. And hopefully we all can soon. If anyone wants to get in touch with Lance, Jean said, yes, it was wonderful. I would like you to know Lance went out of his way today. Oh, we have a question from Ruth. What are your plans for the plants and seeds you will be producing?
So a lot of those will be used for the land managers, like the DNR and county conservation boards, but we're not necessarily restricting it. I mean, if we do have enough seed that, you know, a private landowner could purchase some, and we'd certainly be open to that.
Okay, great. Any other questions? As I was saying, Lance went out of his way. He had a couple other things come up unexpectedly, and he went out of his way to join us. So we really appreciate that and for being here today. And we're anxious to visit your prairies very soon. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Lance. And thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with us. And have a great Earth Day and have a great weekend. So thank you very much.
Thank you.